The way that I set up my mixer, because I like to work fast and not work very hard, cue comments from ex-girlfriends. Hey, what up y'all? Mr. Cruz here, your friendly neighborhood producer, back with another video. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Arturia's EQ Sitral 235. Lego. So yep, once again, we're taking a look at another Arturia plugin. In a small way, I'm starting to feel like I'm just one notes on this channel anymore. No, I'm just playing. This thing gonna be dope. So this is an EQ Sitral 235, and EQs are pretty common. I mean, they come a dime a dozen, and it's probably very hard to find one EQ that is going to be different or do things differently than a different EQ. It's like if you've seen one, you've seen them all. But this EQ, it's like the M. Night Shyamalan of EQs because it's got a twist to it.
What a twist!
This EQ is actually being advertised as a bus effect. So in case you don't know what a bus effect is, I'm going to show you guys here. I'm going to explain this. The way that I set up my mixer, because I like to work fast and not work very hard, cue comments from ex-girlfriends, is I like to set everything up in buses. So that means in this one right here where I have all of my yellow or orange colored channels, all of these are being routed to this one right here that's labeled as drums. So you can kind of notice it at the bottom how each single one is being routed to drums. My drums are being routed to another channel called my submix, and my submix is being routed to my master channel. Same thing here with these strings. My instruments, which are in blue, are both being routed to my instruments, and then my instruments is being routed to sub, blah, blah, blah. You kind of get the point here. The folks across the street are like doing landscaping and it's mad loud. So forgive me. But the reason that you would want to bus instruments together is because if they're similar, or if you're going to be applying the same effect to them, then it makes sense to do something like this because you'll have less processing on your channels, which means less CPU usage, and it'll allow you to work a lot quicker because instead of applying an EQ to every single channel, you're applying it to one single channel and making the same move for all of those instruments. So that's why this EQ is different, because they're encouraging you to throw it on a bus channel and apply it that way versus applying it to every single channel. Of course, we are living in a world with no rules, which Pete Davidson's dating history is a strong testament to that. So let's go ahead. We're going to throw this on our instrument channel. And right now it's set to default. Let's go over some of these parameters and these features, and then we'll go ahead and give it a test drive. So the one thing that I want to show first is that we have this button over here. So this is our link button. Whenever we have the link button enabled, that means the top and the bottom EQs are going to work in tandem. So when I make a move at the top, it's going to also make the same move on the bottom. These two are kind of going to function as kind of like a split EQ. I'll explain it later, but for now, just know that that's what this button does. So we have shelving EQ right here. This switch right here sets our low shelf cutoff frequency. We have our dB. So again, with our low shelf, this tells us how far we can push it or how much we're going to be cutting back. And then these knobs right here in the center called presence. It's modeled after like a German EQ. So that's kind of their little fun way of throwing that in there. Right here, we have where we can select what our mid frequency is going to be, and then of course how much we can boost it. And then over here we have the exact same thing that we had with our low end, where we have our high shelf boost, our high shelf frequency, and then our high shelf cutoff. This right here is the really cool part. I'm going to disable our link for now to explain to you guys what our output does right here. So this functions just like a normal output gain, where you can either raise or lower the volume depending on what it is that you want. And you can partially ignore doing that or using that if you have auto gain set, because auto gain will match what the output level is according to what the input level was. But when link is not enabled, you can manipulate these individually. So for example, if I wanted to take the top EQ and I wanted to boost it on a high shelf, I can then turn down the high shelf so that it's not overpowering the output. And you can also make that change with the bottom one as well. That might not have a whole lot of application, but where it does apply is right here with this button right here, MS. If you don't know what mid-side processing is, it's pretty much you manipulating, if your audio is in stereo, you manipulating and changing the frequencies that are happening, whether they're being spread apart or whether they're being centralized or monoized is kind of what it's called. So with mid-side, what you can do, technically speaking, which is probably the greatest thing about this EQ, is my top EQ now becomes my mid EQ. And my bottom EQ becomes my side EQ. So when mid side is not selected, my EQs function as in left and right. So I can manipulate, raise the volume on the right side versus turning the volume down on my left side. I can do that according to however I want. And obviously, like, I can cut the low end or cut the high end or boost the mids or whatever, and I can manipulate and change each side individually on my stereo channel. When mid side is selected, my top becomes my mid and my bottom becomes the side. So with my bottom, the side, what I would probably do is I would cut a lot of the low end out, and I would boost some of the high end, and I would probably turn that volume up because I really want the high end to stand out. Or actually, probably, you know what, I might really want the mid to really pop out and really stand out. It depends on like whatever kind of beat or whatever kind of song that you're mixing. But in my opinion, that's what makes this EQ stand out, because I don't have any EQ in my arsenal that allows me to change the volume of the mid and the side individually. So that's a pretty awesome thing, that you can do those individually versus, you know, if you have them linked, you can do them in tandem. But if you're doing mid side, you probably don't want to have that happen simultaneously. And then down here, you have this really cool knob called range. So let me explain what range is, what this knob does. If I have my range set to 1, all right, as I'm making my EQ moves might include curves. And what the range will do is, if my range is set to 1, that means 100% of those curves are going to be as they are. So this is kind of like neutral. If I change that to 0.75, this is kind of where like the math teacher in me is coming out. 0.75 as a percent is 75%. So this means that those EQ boost and those curves are now diminished to 75% of what their original value was. Range pretty much is going to have zero change and nothing is going to be any different, but the lower that you go down, those cuts are going to be smoothed out according to the percent that is equivalent to whatever the decimal is there. So if we have this down here at 0, that pretty much means that those EQ curves are essentially going to be flat. And then lastly, we have this switch here, which applies towards the character of our EQ. If you have it set to original, you're not going to notice anything. But if you set it to alternative, alternative is going to apply saturation, but it's only going to apply saturation to any kind of boosting that you do that is going to be really, really high. And even then, the saturation is going to be subtle. I would personally probably just apply a saturation plugin after the fact that is going to give me more flexibility. But if you wanted to do that inside the EQ, you can right here. And the last two things that I wanted to show you guys is the visualizer being one. This is probably a really good opportunity to show you what range would look like. You can kind of tell or see some of the curves that we have here. With range, I'm going to set this to 0, and then you'll see all of those curves flat, right? It pretty much flattens everything out. But with 100%, then you get like the full spectrum of, you know, the curves and the EQ boost that you made. But the visualizer gives you a really good instance of being able to see what you are EQing. I'm going to say this though, 9 times out of 10 is going to be better to EQ without a visualizer, because it gives you a better representation of what you are hearing versus what you are seeing. But that's just me. It is nice that they included it though. And then you can also get to see, you can enable and disable whatever you want to see. So if you only wanted to see the input, you can enable only the input, or the left, right. You can also select whether or not you want to see the mid, the side, the in, the out, whatever. And then lastly, down here, we have step control. So with step control, if you notice that each one of these knobs have notches. So when step control is enabled, it'll jump only to those notches, versus when step control is not enabled, and then you can kind of freely move in between where those notches are. And then of course, if you hold control, you can make those really finite movements with your EQ. All right, boom, we got all that stuff out of the way. Let's go ahead and test this junk out. So I'm gonna throw this on our submix, because as our submix, I want to be able to use it as our mid-side EQ. I only personally have one EQ that allows me to do mid-side, but it doesn't have the ability to turn up and down the mid-sides individually. So that's really what I wanna be able to use this for. So let's go ahead and test this out. Okay, so after testing it out for a little bit, I had to turn on the visualizer because I was a bit confused as to like where our EQ moves were being sent and like how they were being boosted or whatnot. With that being said, having these two right here, I think is a big help to be able to see what our mid side looks like. To be able to determine like, okay, I can hear that presence, or I can hear that high shelf, I can hear that low cut, or at least I know where they are so that I can make my moves accordingly. Also, I was very impressed that I was able to get a very similar sound from what the EQ, the mid-side EQ that I already have in there. But what I did do here is I boosted a little bit more of the low end to be able to get more of that punch from that kick and that 808. Even though it looks like I cut it, I turned the auto gain off because it was, in my opinion, significantly louder. So I wanted to make sure that I was making those adjustments as I saw fit. Overall, I think it's an amazing EQ to be able to have not only a visualizer, the step controls, which is great, but this right here, being able to have an output for your mid and your side individually is a huge help in my opinion. Realistically, this is the EQ that I'm going to be using to get my beats to slap harder than Will Smith. Which, I mean, Chris Rock ate that slap, so maybe it wasn't even that hard at all. Well, that's what I got for you guys. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. If you feel like you've learned something, make sure you hit that like button for me. And if you're interested in checking out a reverb plugin that I have recently reviewed as a part of Arturia's Effects Collection 2, click this video right here. Outside of that, it's your boy, Mr. Cruz. Out.